Now, despite the pandemic, the European Commission that there would be some kind of a tourist summer season. So what might that look like? As of today, several EU countries are reopening their internal borders so that citizens can travel. First off, that will be Germany as of today, but also Germany's joined by Switzerland, who are doing the same, Belgium, France, Iceland and Croatia, where the citizens there will be allowed to have visitors from other EU nations. They join Italy and Poland, who've already been doing this for a few days already. And the idea is to really kick-start the economy, particularly the travel, tourism and aviation sectors. But of course, that raises another challenge for airlines of how they keep passengers travelling in a pandemic safe while they're on board. The idea from the European Commission is that internal borders within the EU and the member states open as of today. But they want to go further than that, the start of next month, opening up external borders. And the European Commission explained why last week.
This situation is really improving in all member states. The situation is converging, and the ECDC has made a report that closing internal border, having internal border restrictions is not an effective measure.
But despite that plea from the European Commission, several countries haven't opened their borders as of today. Spain, for example, Portugal and Denmark. Well, to get us an idea of how this has actually been working, we can go now to Italy to speak to our correspondent, Georgia Orlandi, who's in Rome for us. Georgia, Italy's borders have been open for the last 2 weeks or so. So how's that been working in practice, and are people actually travelling across the border?
Good morning, Rosie. Well, despite the fact that Italy was the very epicenter of the outbreak, is one of the few countries that reopened its borders quite earlier than other countries from the 3rd of June. In fact, visitors from the Schengen area can enter the country with no obligation to self-isolate. Italy is heavily dependent on tourism that accounts for 13% of GDP. But despite that, it's going to be a slow restart. In fact, the EU Commission called for the reopening of the bloc's internal borders from today, but we can clearly see a mixed picture, with each country having its own rules in place and its own timetable for the reopening. That also means that things won't go back to normal at least until the end of the month. If you take also Italians traveling abroad now, from the 3rd of June, they can travel abroad, but there are still a number of restrictions in place according to the country. In the case of Greece, for example, Italy is among the 5 key markets for Greece's tourism sector, but still only recently the two countries could find an agreement. So that means that it's going to be a slow restart. It's going to be domestic tourism for a while, with Italians moving internally. If you take the Colosseum, for example, on its first day of reopening, just a few hundred people got access to the site, compared to 20,000 people a day before the lockdown. 70% of those visitors are foreign visitors. So you can only imagine the impact of the coronavirus on the sector, Rosie.
Georgia, thank you very much. Our correspondent there in Rome. Several Nordic countries had already opened up their borders to each other in a bubble arrangement, but that excluded Sweden because of its unconventional strategy to deal with the virus. Today, though, that will all change. We can go now to speak to our reporter, Pere Nyberg, who's in Stockholm for us. Per, tell us what changes for Sweden today, and how does it work both ways? So who can come into Sweden, and also who will be allowed to travel as well?
Well, good morning, Rosie. Basically, anyone is still welcome to come into Sweden, but Sweden has been excluded by all the other Nordic countries. We've heard from Finland, we've heard from Norway, we've heard from Denmark. They're all saying that Swedes are just not welcome to their countries if they want to go there for vacation. So instead, what changes for Sweden is that this summer we're looking at a staycation. People will have to go on vacation in Sweden instead of traveling to Norway, to Denmark, to Finland. And we've heard from the Swedish government, the Swedish Foreign Minister. She said that she's very concerned about this. She feels that this could create deep wounds when it comes to the cooperation, the close cooperation between the Nordic countries. You know, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, they basically have almost seamless borders. People living on the borders, they just don't know almost like in which country they actually live in, if it's Sweden or if it's Norway, because there is such a close cooperation between these countries when it comes to jobs, trade, even just neighboring towns. But now now, if you look at a map with Sweden in the center, you've got Norway, Denmark, Finland all around you saying, don't come here because of the situation, because of the spread of the COVID-19 virus in Sweden. This will be reevaluated in the coming weeks, but for now, Sweden is just excluded from traveling to the other Nordic countries.
Thank you very much, Per, speaking to us there in Stockholm.